Nazirite vow. One of them was that he was not supposed to have anything to do with alcohol, not even grapes. The second one was that he was not supposed to ever cut his hair. That was part of his vow. And the third one was that he was not supposed to have contact with any kind of dead thing, whether it be animal or human. It was against his vow as a Nazirite. But what we saw in Judges chapter 14 was that he violated two of those kind of stipulations on his vow as a Nazirite. What he did was he not only killed a lion, but then when the bees made honey in the carcass of the lion, he reached in and scooped it out and ate that honey, violating that vow. Then not only that, but in his he was getting ready to marry a Philistine woman. He throws this wine banquet, this bachelor party, this stag party, and there, more than likely, Samson indulged in wine out drinking with the boys. And so we see that he violated that one as well. And it was at this bachelor party, this celebration of his marriage to this woman, that Samson decided also to gamble. He decided that he wanted to make a bet. And he bet the Philistines that were there, the enemies of God's people, the enemies supposed to be the enemies of Samson, he bet them that they couldn't guess his riddle. Now the Philistines really didn't want to lose face. So what they did was they went to his fiancée and they said, you need to figure out the answer to this riddle. Oh, and by the way, if you don't, we're going to kill you and your dad. Right? So she had some really good motivation to figure out the answer to this riddle. She finds out the answer to the riddle. She tells him, Samson loses the bet. And where we ended last week was Samson is furious, right? He's so upset, as a matter of fact, he leaves the bachelor party, he leaves his fiancée behind, and he goes home to mom and dad. While he's home with mom and dad, what happens down in Philistia is that the man gives his wife, his fiancée, to another man. So when we get to chapter 15, which we didn't cover last week, but let me just summarize because we're going to skip right to chapter 16 this morning. This is what happens in chapter 15. Samson's there in his hometown and he starts to cool down. He starts to relax. And he's like, you know what? I want to go visit my wife. So he goes back down to visit his wife. And what does he discover? Dad's given her to another guy. Samson is furious. He is so upset that he catches 300 foxes. This is a very weird story. How was he able to do that? How did they not bite him? How long did this take? I don't know. But we're told he catches 300 foxes. He ties them tail to tail, and then he puts a torch between those tails, sends them out into the grain, into the olive orchards to burn all the Philistine stuff. The Philistines are furious. They come and investigate the situation. How did this happen? What happened? They find out, they discover it was because this man gave Samson's wife to another man. And so what do? They kill the woman and her dad, just like they were scared was going to happen before. Now Samson hears this and he goes ballistic, right? He is so upset. He goes and kills each and every one of those men. Then he goes back to Judah. One more part of this. So then the men of Judah now come up. Samson's living by himself in a cave. He's kind of like off by himself. I don't even know if anybody knows that he's there. The men from the Philistines come up. They attack Judah. They start warring against Judah. And the men from Judah are like, hey, what's going on? What happened? Why are you attacking us? They tell them what happened with Samson. And they said, look, we'll stop attacking you. All we want is Samson. You give us Samson, this is done. So Samson's people, they gather 3,000 men. 3,000 men. And then they go and they nervously confront Samson. Right? They're like, hey, Samson, buddy, can we talk to you for a minute? Right? 3,000 guys for this one guy. Samson comes out. He goes, what's going on? They say, they're attacking us, and the only way they'll stop is if you give yourself up. Samson agrees. Right? We kind of miss that part of his character sometimes. He agrees. He says, you guys bind me. Go ahead and give me to the enemies. They see Samson coming up bound. The Philistines are super excited. They run out to get him, and then the Spirit of the Lord rushes upon Samson. He busts the ropes. He grabs the jawbone of a dead donkey that was right there, and with that jawbone, he whoops on and beats and kills 1,000 Philistines, 1,000 men at one time by himself. At the end, he's exhausted, he's tired, he's breathing heavy, he feels like he's going to die of thirst. He cries out to the Lord, and what does God do? God breaks open a spot in the rocky ground, water gushes forth, Samson drinks, he's revived. And then we read this at the end of chapter 15. And he judged Israel in the days of the Philistines 20 years. And you know, if that was the end of the story, because that's how a lot of the judges' stories end, if that was the end of the story, I think we'd be left scratching our head going, now wait a minute here. There seems to be some inconsistencies between Samson's behavior and between the moral requirements that were required of a Nazirite. Is Samson really going to get away with all of that stuff that he's done, all those sinful things that he's done? And I think these apparent inconsistencies should generate some questions in our mind. And I have 3 questions I want you to ponder as I've shared this story that I think are important ones. Doesn't God care when the boundaries that he's established for us are crossed by us? Doesn't God care? Doesn't sin have consequences? And one more, can we abuse the power of God, dive headfirst into sin, and then go on our merry way, live safely, live happily, right? If all we had was Judges chapter 14 and 15, we would come to a much different conclusion than we do after we read chapter 16. Because what we see in Judges chapter 16 is that each and every one of these questions is going to be answered. And that's what we're going to look at this morning. So let's jump into our passage, Judges chapter 16. I'm going to read the first couple verses here. Verse 1. Samson went to Gaza. That's Philistine territory. Samson went to Gaza, and there he saw a prostitute, and he went into her. The Gazites were told, Samson has come here. And they surrounded the place and set an ambush for him all night at the gate of the city. They kept quiet all night, saying, let us wait till the light of the morning, then we're going to kill him. But Samson lay till midnight. And at midnight he arose and took hold of the doors of the gate of the city and the 2 posts and pulled them up, bar and all, put them on his shoulders and carried them to the top of the hill that is in front of Hebron. That's where I want to stop. An incredible story. But what I want to point out here is we see how Samson is continuing to degrade, right? He's getting further and further and deeper into sin. Because see, at the beginning of Samson's story in chapter 14, we're told that Samson went down to Timnah. Again, he sees a woman, but this woman he wants to marry, right? So the wedding is established and all those things. But now we read that he goes down to Gaza and he sees a prostitute. And he pays money to the prostitute and then he spends the night with her. But yet, once again, we see that how Samson seems to be free from the consequences of his sin, because what happens is he realizes the city's locked down, he realizes he's surrounded, and so what he does, he wakes up, he goes to the gates of the city, and apparently the Lord gave him strength to rip those gates off, and Samson goes on his merry way. He seems free to do whatever he wants, even if that's sinful things. But what we're going to see as Samson runs into Delilah and meets Delilah, his freedoms are going to be sacrificed. And finally, he's not going to be free to do the things that he wants to do. Look with me at verse 4. After this, right after the thing with the gates, he loved a woman in the valley of Sorek, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, seduce him and see where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him to humble him. And we will each give you 1,100 pieces of silver. So Delilah said to Samson, "Please tell me where your great strength lies and how you might be bound that one could subdue you." And so let's stop there this morning. For the first time in Samson's story, we see that Samson, it's possible for him to love someone more than he actually loves himself. We're told that he actually loved Delilah. Now, unfortunately for Samson, what's going to happen is Delilah is going to end up treating him much like he's been treating women throughout his entire life, just as kind of a means to an end. That's what's going to happen. Samson doesn't know it yet. But this week as I've been just kind of thinking about Samson, I've been trying to get into his headspace. I've been thinking what was it like to be this man? Something strange has happened. And what's happened is I've actually developed a sympathy for Samson, a greater sympathy than I ever had before, because I want you to consider life from Samson's position, okay? Before this guy was even born, he's famous. Right? It's been prophesied, you're going to have a son. Not only are you going to have a son, but he's going to deliver Israel. He's going to begin to deliver Israel from the Philistines. So he grew up in light of that. Everybody watching him. Everybody seeing what he's going to do. Maybe people taking notes. People expecting big, big things from this guy. He grew up in almost a celebrity kind of culture, I would imagine. People watching him under the microscope all the time. Then not only that, he grows up in wicked, pagan, evil Israel. Probably no spiritual mentor, probably no spiritual foundation laid in his life, certainly no church to speak of, probably no copy of the scriptures that Samson was familiar with. Then add on top of those two things, right, his popularity, his famous status, growing up in wicked pagan Israel. Then on top of that, he's given the power and the strength to kill 1,000 men at once. Men are scared of him. They don't want to upset him. They want to be his buddy. He's been called the judge and ruler of Israel. And I'm left here thinking, hey, which one of us, if we were in that position, wouldn't be at least slightly arrogant and brash and cocky? I certainly would have been. And it's in this condition that Samson finds himself that he starts playing with sin. He starts toying with sin. And what happens? He gets away with it. And he gets away with it. And he gets away with it. He scoops honey out of the carcass of the lion. Not supposed to do that. Nothing happens. He goes on a drinking binge with his buddies. Hey, what happens? Nothing. Nothing happens. He sleeps with prostitutes. Hey, what happens? Nothing happens at all. I think if I was Samson, I would start to think, hey, maybe the same rules that apply to everybody else probably don't apply to me. I might be something special. And I can imagine in that state of mind, wouldn't life be boring? Wouldn't you be looking for a thrill or something to conquer? Wouldn't you look for something to just get some kind of rush of excitement? I certainly would. And I would see how close I could get to the edge of things without falling off. I would see how close I could get to the flame without getting burned. But what we're going to see, if you know the story, or if you don't, what we're going to see is that Samson, when Delilah comes into his life, he's about to get burned. He just doesn't know it yet. And the reason he's about to get burned is because Delilah has it out for him. She has it out for him. She says, Samson, Samson, what makes you so strong? How is it that you can be overpowered? Now, I hope you're thinking, what an idiot. Yeah, why doesn't alarm bells and red flags begin to go off in his mind? Now, I have some possible reasons for that, and I want to talk about those in a minute. But for now, let's just say Samson should have run for the hills. This woman is questioning him about how can someone defeat you? How can someone ruin you? How can someone take you down? But he doesn't. Instead, he decides to go to the edge, see how close he can get to the flame to try to start toying with Delilah. So he goes, oh, you want to know how I can be defeated? Here's how, Delilah. If they take 7 fresh bowstrings and bind me up with them, I will be weak. I will become as every other man. Delilah's like, great, let's go to bed. right? Probably puts him to sleep. She has the Philistines come over and hide in her house. She binds him with these bowstrings, and then she wakes him up as if she's on his side. Samson, the Philistines are upon you. The Philistines are upon you. Samson jumps up, snaps those bowstrings like they're nothing. His secret hasn't been revealed. I would imagine at this point, Delilah is a little bit miffed, right? She's not as mad as she's going to be, but she keeps it together. She has a goal. She has a purpose. She wants all that money that they've promised her. So she asks him again, maybe not the same day, maybe later on, Samson, what is the secret of your strength? How can you be overpowered by someone? Samson goes, okay, now I'm going to tell you for real. He goes, this is what they have to do. You have to bind me with new ropes. That's the secret. If I'm bound with new ropes, I'll become weak like every other man. Same scenario plays out. Men are hiding. She binds him. Samson, wake up. The Philistines are upon you. He wakes up, snaps the ropes, probably laughs about it. And I would imagine just Delilah is just fuming inside. She is probably so upset, embarrassed before the Philistines. I can't conquer this man. He doesn't want to reveal to me what's going on. So she approaches him another time. She says, Samson, you've only mocked me. I think you hate me. I don't think you love me at all. Tell me how you can be overpowered. Samson goes, okay, now this time I'm going to tell you for real. This is the real deal. If you take my hair and you weave it into the fabric on your loom, then all my strength will leave me, and all of a sudden I'll be just like every other man. Well, she does that. She puts him to sleep somehow, some way, gets his hair in the loom without waking him up. Philistines are upon you. The Philistines are upon you. Samson wakes up, yanks the loom out, and the secret of his strength has not yet been revealed. I would imagine Delilah's pretty upset at this point, but she holds it together. She has her eye on the prize, all that money that she wants. Look with me at verse 15. This is what she tells him. And she said to him, how can you say I love you when your heart is not with me? Oh, the audacity of that. You have mocked me these 3 times, and you have not told me where your great strength lies. And when she pressed him hard with her words day after day, and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. And he told her all his heart. And he said to her, a razor has never come upon my head, for I've been a Nazirite to God from my mother's womb. If my head is shaved, then my strength will leave me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. Man, we read that and we go, Samson, buddy, what are you doing? Why are you doing this? Why would you know this woman has it out for you? Have you ever heard the saying, sin makes you stupid? It does, doesn't it? And so I think there's definitely some of that going on here. I think that the sin had just made Samson dumb, but I also think there's a few other things going on inside of Samson here other than just sin making him dumb. The first thing that we recognize, Samson seems to have been a very, very prideful man, very prideful, right? The choices that he made in life, the decisions that he made, all seem to reveal that Samson pretty much thought he was untouchable. Samson thought that the great strength that God had given him was actually his own. He believed that he was the captain of his own soul. And there are plenty of things in his life to make him believe that, right? We've talked about him. He violated the Nazirite vow. God still strengthens him to defeat the Philistines, right? He sleeps with a prostitute. God still gives him strength to yank up the gates of the city. But what we're going to learn from Samson's life is this. It's a lesson for all of us. Just because the consequences for sin are sometimes delayed, if we choose to continue down that road, they are certain. They are certain. Sin has consequences, right? Let me share with you a verse from Galatians 6 where we read the same idea. Do not be deceived. God is not mocked. For whatever one sows, that will he also reap. So Samson's sowing bad seed, and he's about to reap the whirlwind. Samson, in his pride, believed that he was untouchable, which I guess would probably give us maybe an insight, at least one insight into why Samson may have been so stupid as to share the secret of his strength. He probably thought he was untouchable. I've done all these other things, nothing happened. That's what I would be thinking as well. So that's one reason. Another reason I think Samson was so stupid to share the secret of his great strength comes down to ego. Now, ego and pride sometimes get confused, but I think they're different. And by ego, I mean he just had this inflated idea, this inflated opinion of himself. We're told that Samson loved Delilah, but we're never told that Delilah loved Samson. And it actually becomes really, really clear that not only did she not love him, she despised him and hated him. She was willing to accept money in order to sell him into slavery, in order for him to be tortured. And for a man like Samson, whose ego is his entire identity, that would be a hard reality to face. It would crush your ego. I agree with what one commentator, Gary Phillips, says. This is what he says. And think if this is true. When your self-worth and your self-identity rest squarely and solely on your ego and nothing else, then forcing yourself to face the evidence that will destroy your ego becomes almost impossible. See, Samson was a man who could never believe there was something that he could not conquer. And I mean, who can blame the guy? Who wouldn't have an ego like that? He had conquered every single thing in his life, probably without much effort. And when you're in that condition, what I believe Samson probably was able to do, like we read in Romans 1, was to suppress the truth, suppress the obvious, because he couldn't believe that Delilah was actually, he couldn't bear that to be the truth, that Delilah really didn't want to be with him, that she really didn't love with him, that she would really sell him out. And so he's able to just blind himself to the reality that's clear to probably every one of us and everyone at that time. So why was Samson so stupid to share with her the secret of his great strength? I think pride, probably. His ego that couldn't bear to admit the fact that there was something that he couldn't conquer blinded him to reality. But I also think there's another thing going on. And I think it's what we talked about a minute ago. I think Samson was probably bored, right? There was no challenges in his life. And he was looking for something, he was looking for some way to get a rush of excitement in his life. That's probably what I would be doing if I put myself in Samson's place. I mean, think about this guy's life. Fighting men, you know, the things that men valued in those days, right? Fighting men, not a challenge. That wasn't anything. Feats of strength, nothing. Got that all day. Been doing that since I was little. No big deal. Popularity, God, everyone knows who I am. People know my name, no problem. Got that. Everyone knows who I am. Everyone knows who Samson is. And I can imagine that this scenario with Delilah gave him an opportunity to kind of experience a little bit of risk, to see how close he could get to the edge without falling off. Hey, I can't seem to conquer this woman, so I'm going to keep going further and further and further and further. Have you ever been there in your own life? I have. And so I imagine that there's some of you here today. What do you do when you scan the horizon of your life and there's no more challenges? There's nothing else to conquer, and all of a sudden, life seems pretty boring. How do you fight that boredom in your life, that ho-humness, and try to add a little bit of excitement to your life? I think many of us do what Samson did. He flirts with sin, and he tries to see how close he can get to the flame without being burned. Now, let me give you some ways that we do this, some ways that people do this. Maybe for you, when there seems to be no challenges on the horizon and life just seems boring, what do you do to kind of flirt with sin and get close to the edge and kind of look over? For some of you, it may be something like gambling. lottery tickets, casinos, things like this. Maybe when life gets boring, you get a kind of rush of excitement of spending more money than you know that you should, putting that money on the outcome of random chance at many times, and there's like great rewards and great risks, and you get this rush that kind of helps you to deal with the boredom of life. That's one way people deal with it. Maybe your thing is stealing. Maybe it's nothing big, right? We're in church here. Let's pretend people don't steal big things in church. But maybe it's something small, right? You take things home from the office and from work, things that you know that as a Christian you shouldn't be doing that. Yeah, the company will never miss it. No one knew anything. But there's something in it that gives you just this little bump, this little rush of excitement, like, maybe I'll get caught. Maybe that's it. Or maybe for you, I think this is probably more common with people because of our society. We live in a very sexualized culture. So maybe for you, it's flirting with someone at work. Maybe for you, it's flirting with someone online. And there's something about these private, intimate conversations with these people that kind of just inflames you and stirs you up and help you deal with the boredom of life. And a million more things. We're all unique, we're all different. Maybe none of these cover you, but you know what I'm talking about. I pray you know what I'm talking about. What do you turn to get a little rush, see how close you can get to the edge when we get bored? If that's you this morning, if God has identified something in your mind, do not be deceived. God is not mocked. One of the things we learn from Samson is if we continue down that road, there's going to be consequences. They will come. They may be delayed because God is merciful, but they will come. Look with me at verse 18. We'll see these consequences. When Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called the lords of the Philistines, saying, "Come up again, for he has told me all his heart." Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her, brought the money in their hands. She made him sleep on her knees, and she called a man and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. Then she began to torment him, and his strength left him. And she said, "The Philistines are upon you, Samson." And he awoke from his sleep and said, "I will go out as at other times and shake myself free." But he did not know that the Lord had left him. And the Philistines seized him and gouged out his eyes and brought him down to Gaza and bound him with bronze shackles. And he ground at the mill in the prison. You know, it's been said there's no sadder verse in the Old Testament than the sentence we read at the end of verse 20. But he did not know that the Lord had left him. See, Samson went too far. He moved from just basically ignoring the Lord and doing what he wanted to completely, totally abandoning the Lord. Because he gave his love and his loyalty and the secret between him and God to this woman. And for the first time in his life, Samson knew what it was like to be abandoned by the Lord. All of his pride, all of his ego, all of the thrill of sin, all of a sudden came crashing down, and Samson had a rude awakening where he realized that all of his strength was just hanging by a hair in his life. You know, and as we read Samson's story, he kind of lives out for us a picture of what happens to us when we allow sin into our lives and we hold it there and we keep it there. What happens is that sin binds us, it blinds us, and it grinds us, right? That's exactly what we see. Samson was bound. He was blinded, and he was turned into a slave. The man who no one could defeat because there was sin in his life, the man who no one could bind, all of a sudden was bound. The man who had so many exploits, but one of the problems with Samson was he allowed his eyes to lead his heart. And what happened? Because of his sin, he was blinded. The man who had used the jawbone of a donkey to kill 1,000 men is now treated like a beast of burden. The man who had set fire to the enemies of God, his enemies, the Philistines, is now forced to grind their grain in the mill for them. It's sad. It's sad. But that's the picture of what happens to us when we allow sin to stay in our lives. I'm not saying we don't sin. We all sin, but I'm saying we should keep short accounts with sin and not allow these things to build up. There's consequences. And I want to share something that I think is really, really important here. Kind of a little sidebar, but not really, because this is where I've been wanting to go. And it's something that Lawson Stone talks about in his commentary. And I want to mention his name because I want to give him credit because he's the one who got me even thinking this way. And it has to do with the consequences of sin. See, I think the church today, in an attempt to kind of push back against the legalism of a former age in the church, sometimes I think they've gone too far the other way. Arms open, y'all come. It doesn't matter how broken you are. It doesn't matter how morally reprehensible you are. And I have no problem with that. That is absolutely true. The gospel is a message of grace, free forgiveness from God through Christ. That is absolutely true. And I agree with what Stone says. The church is meant to be a hospital, a place where people who have experienced the brokenness in their lives from sin can come and be healed through Jesus Christ. Absolutely. However, there seems to be an increasing number of churches in America that are wrestling with or are full of different forms of abuse, corruption, divorce, immorality, sexual sins. These things have been, and the reason this is going on is because these things have been allowed to linger in the shadows, but these things won't stay in the shadows. They want to be out. They want to come out, and that's what we're seeing happening. And the question Lawson Stone asks, I think, is a good one. This is what he asks. In stressing God's grace to sinners, have we lost the vital balancing message that sin harms people deeply? Let me ask you that again. In stressing God's grace to sinners, have we lost the vital balancing message that sin harms people deeply? I think in many ways we have. See, sin is not only offensive to a holy God, but it also destroys our humanity. It ruins who we are as people. We see that clearly lived out in Samson's life. The man who lived like an animal ended up becoming treated like an animal. When there's sin in our lives, it leaves us weak and it makes us less able to fulfill God's plans and purposes for us. And the question we have to ask ourselves, have we been so accepting of sinners? Hey, everybody come, that the destructive nature of sin itself has been totally disregarded? That's a serious question for the church today. Have we been so accepting of sinners that the destructive nature of sin has been completely disregarded in an attempt to make people feel comfortable, not make them feel uncomfortable, fill seats on a Sunday morning? I think it's a possibility. Have we created an environment in our churches where people who actually do their best to try to avoid sin and try their best to live holy lives and try their best to be conformed in the image of God, have we created an environment where those people actually feel less important and they feel overlooked? Meanwhile, others feel emboldened to sin because, hey, after all, God forgives even the worst sinners. God help us. I hope that we haven't become a church like that. I don't want us. As long as I am here, we will not become a church like that, right? That's not the church. We learn in the story of Samson very clearly Sin destroys our humanity. Sin will destroy our humanity. It weakens us, and it makes us less able to fulfill God's plans for us. And check this out. Sometimes, if that's not enough for you, maybe you need a little fear put in you. Sometimes our sin has lifelong and life-altering consequences. I'm thinking about David and Bathsheba. He commits adultery with her, and he kills Uriah. And what happens? God tells him, David, because you've done this, the sword will never leave your house. And it didn't. Permanent consequences for his sin. There was fighting in his family. There was death in his family. There was war in his family. God forgave him. David was a man after God's heart all the way to his death. However, war never left his house. The sword never left his house. What about King Saul? King Saul rebels and rejects God's word, disobeys him time and time again. And what do we read? God removed his spirit from Saul permanently. He never got it back. God removed it from him permanently. What about the children of Israel? When they're wandering in the wilderness, God says, hey, there's the land I promised you. I want you guys to go on in there. And they said, no, we're not going to do it. No, not today, Lord. It looks rough. I don't think we can do it. They disobey. They rebel against the Lord. And what happens? That opportunity is removed permanently. They were never able to enter the promised land. What about Moses? Even Moses. God told Moses, I want you to speak to this rock and out will come water. Moses in his anger strikes the rock. God says, Moses, permanent lifetime consequences. He was never able to enter the promised land either. And look at Samson. Samson, living this life of perpetual sin and darkness, all of a sudden his eyes are put out and he's put in darkness forever. Forever. The point is, guys, sin is not something to play around with. See, you're free to choose what you do. You can leave here and do whatever you want, but you are not free to pick the consequences. That's the truth of this world. No matter how much the world tells you, you're free to choose, you're your own authority. You're free to choose what you want to do, but you are not free to choose the consequences. And I hope Samson's story has reminded us of that. That was my tangent. Now we'll get back. I also hope Samson's story has also reminded us of the grace of the Lord and the great hope that we have in the Lord for those of us who maybe are flirting with sin right now. Look at what we read in verse 22. He's there, he's blinded, he's bound, he's grinding mill at the prison. And what happens? The hair of his head begins to grow again after it had been shaved. And see, here we get a glimmer of hope that this is not the end of Samson's story. And it's not the end of Samson's story. Samson's an interesting character because of this. What happens is the Philistines are celebrating their great victory over Samson and the God of Samson and the people of Samson. And so they have this big celebration at the temple of their God. Thousands of people are there. They get all stirred up. Hey, let's bring Samson out, have him grind some grain in front of us, have him entertain us so that we can laugh at him, so we can mock at him, so we can talk about how great our God is. And they do. They bring him out. He can't see. He's forced to entertain these godless people. And they're in that condition. Samson does something really, really smart. Something the Israelites of his time never did, not much. He cries out to the Lord. He says, Lord, I know I've messed up, but will you strengthen me this one last time? Will you let me get revenge for what these people have done to your people and what they have done, how they have taken my eyes? Will you give me revenge? And guess what God does? He strengthens him. Samson holds on to the pillars of this great temple and he breaks them. And as he does, the building collapses. And we read that there at Samson's death, as the building fell upon him, he killed more people in his death than he ever did in his life. It's estimated there was somewhere between 5,000 to 10,000 enemies of God there. 5,000 to 10,000 of the Philistines. So, where does that leave us? Right? Characters in the Bible sometimes leave us scratching our hair. Where does that leave us with Samson? Was he a good guy? Was he a bad guy? Is he in heaven? Is he not in heaven? Well, for your consideration, I want to offer one more piece of evidence for us to consider before we make up our minds here. And this comes from Hebrews chapter 11, which is called the Hall of Faith. Hebrews is about all the great men and women of God who lived out, by their character, you can see faith lived out. And guess what? Samson's in there. Samson's in there. Let me share this passage with you from Hebrews 11. This is what we read. And what more shall I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, enforced justice, obtained promises, stopped the mouth of lions, quenched the power of the fire, escaped the edge of the sword, were made strong out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Look at that. I think that's Samson right there. Were made strong out of weakness. See, the message from last week, I entitled From Strength to Weakness. This week, I would entitle this message about Samson, From Weakness to Strength. And how did he move from weakness to strength? It was his faith. It was his faith. Let me share with you this quote from Gary Phillips, and we'll get ready to wrap it up. But this is what he says. Some of the heroes in Hebrews 11 lived lives of faith and faithfulness. Some of them, however, had only great moments of faith, such as Samson's last moments. In a significant way, Hebrews 11 is both a hall of faith as well as a hall of salvage. Every person in the chapter had times of significant failure. Samson, at the pivotal moment at the end of his life, from weakness was made strong by faith. I think Samson was a good guy. He did some bad things, did some dumb things. I think Samson's in heaven. People are complicated, and whether he wanted to or not, Samson taught us some lessons, both good and bad. Sin has consequences. We learn that clearly. You may flirt with it for a while, and you may seemingly get away with it for a while, but you continue down that road, man, watch out. Why? It's just the natural consequences of sin. It's not God smashing you. It's the natural consequences of sin. They pay dividends. The wages of sin is death. Sin has consequences, and you are free to choose what you want, but you are not free to choose the consequences. However, our great hope as we look at the life of Samson and his end, there's no one so far gone that God's grace can't reach them, right? That's our great hope for those family members who are living bound, blinded, and slaves to sin. That's our great hope. That there's no, that was my mom and my family's great hope before I became a Christian. There's no one so far gone that God's grace can't meet them. If they'll cry out to him in faith like Samson did, if they'll just cry out. Let's cry out to God. Lord, one thing we've learned through the life of Samson is that people are complicated. He's there in the hero's hall of faith, Lord. And yet, he seems to have gotten away with sin all the way to the end of his life. And then he cries out to the last moment, and it seems like, Lord, you saved him. You delivered him. Lord, we're just reminded that you are a gracious God. We understand a small part of his story, but you understood Samson's heart. You understood his circumstances. And it's understanding someone's heart and understanding someone's circumstances that gives us compassion for that person. Lord, I thank you that you understand all of our stories. You understand the things that we've been through, the things that we're going through, the temptations, the victories, the defeats, Lord. And knowing these things about us, you have compassion towards us. Lord, I pray that this would be the thing that drives us to you. Not fear of the consequences of sin, but our great love for a God who has compassion and mercy on us. That we would know the things that you tell us to do are for our own good. They're not because you're on some power trip. They're to protect us and to conform us more in your image, which is where we will find the greatest happiness in this world we can possibly find. So Lord, help us to be a people that believe that this is in our hearts and our minds. And we ask it not because we're deserving, but because you're merciful, Lord. It's in Jesus' name we pray.